Hello, it's Dawn Michelle from Boho Tarot, and welcome to the next video in my deck collection series. Today we'll be taking a look at the decks that I hang on to for sentimental or collectible reasons, as well as a couple of decks that are strictly for study because I forgot to include them in any other video. Each of the decks in this video, minus my two study decks, all have a story to them, and while some of them may not be decks I actually use, they are decks that have some sort of personal meaning to me. There are a total of 8 decks featured in this video, and you'll find a complete list in the description box below. Let's take a trip down memory lane with my sentimental and collectible tarot decks. So up first we have the very first tarot deck that I ever purchased, which is the Legacy of the Divine. Here is the backs, and I have had this deck for many years and is very well worn. I spoke about this deck quite a bit in my foundational deck video. Because again, it was my first deck, but this deck has a very sentimental place for me because it is the first tarot deck that I ever purchased for myself. It's not exactly a deck that really resonates with me in terms of the artwork, but this was the deck that I cut my teeth on. This was the book that I learned from. Well, this and 78 Degrees of Wisdom by Rachel Pollack, because, you know, that is just the standard. Anyway, this is a deck that just I used and abused for many years, and it will always hold a special place in my heart for that reason, because it is the first deck that I ever bought. Like, it's got a great bow in it from me using it, and it's completely worn, but even though I don't really use it anymore, it's a deck that will probably always be in my collection because it was my first, and you never forget your first, right? So that is the Legacy of the Divine Tarot. So the second deck I ever purchased was the Finestra Tarot. And this is a deck that I purchased because after having Legacy of the Divine, I wanted something a bit more feminine, and this was about the most feminine thing I could find mass market at the time. And I do really love this deck. I know that some people think that the artwork is a little bit funny, and it is, and the faces are a little funny in some of them. But this deck, again, has a lot of sentimental value to me because I used this deck for many years after kind of that masculine energy of the Legacy of the Divine to this really feminine energy of the Finestra. And then sometimes mixing them together, which you wouldn't think that would actually work really well, but it kind of does, or maybe it just did for me because those were the only 2 decks that I had for a really long time. This deck does need a refresh. It is chipping. Like I said, it is old. I have had it forever. It has been well used and well loved. And I do think that the artwork is really pretty, and I do really love the color palette, and I love the gray borders. That is like one of my favorite things about this deck is these gray borders, and I never say that about a deck. And I thought about trimming it because I've seen it trimmed and it looks really cool, but I really love the gray borders, so I think they have to stay. I am going to edge it and give it kind of a refresh. Again, that's going to be in another video, but beautiful backs. So yeah, just another sentimental favorite because it was the second deck I ever purchased, and it has been very well loved and used. So that is the Finestra Tarot. So the next deck in this collection is actually kind of just a collectible deck, and I haven't even taken it out of the box because I want to show you the box. I'm sure you've seen it, but so it's got the slide top box here, but it's inside, it's like little recipe cards, and I just think that is so cute. So it has Housewives Tarots, the major, the minor, and the instruction booklet. I'll just pull out a section of them for you to see. I'm sure everybody's seen this deck. It's funny, it's funky, it's very comical. I love the retro feel of it. Like, I love old movies. I love old TV shows. Like, I Love Lucy is always playing at my house. So I just really dig this fun, funky retro artwork. Love the backs like an old cookbook. I love that the whole thing looks like an old cookbook. Just a fun collectible that I really enjoy having in my collection. So that is the Housewives Tarot. So up next we have another one of my pretty old decks actually, and this is the Steampunk Tarot. And this is the Barbara Moore and Ali Feld one. There is another Steampunk Tarot. I think I put it back in order. Look at me, I did. Anyway, this is a deck, I'm sure you can tell by the chipping. It's another deck that has been really well used and loved. I love the strength card. I love the steampunk vibe of this deck. And the guidebook, I mean, it's a Barbara Moore guidebook, so it's just phenomenal. I absolutely love the guidebook. I've done a ton of work with this deck. This was another one that I think it might have been the third or fourth deck. I can't remember if this or the Housewives Tarot came first, but I think this one was my third deck. But anyway, it's just beautiful. I think the artwork is absolutely stunning in this deck. And it's a very clear, easy reader. I mean, it's very Rider-Waite-Smith. So if you're, familiar with that, you won't have a trouble at all reading with this deck. And I just think it's gorgeous. I love the artwork. I love the steampunk. I think steampunk is so cool. I can't wait to make a new bag for it, but yeah, just absolutely gorgeous. The backs are not my favorite. They're a little bit kind of busy and whatever. And again, look at that bow because it has been used and shuffled. So there you go. So that is the Steampunk Tarot. So the next deck in my sort of sentimental and collectibles is the Crystal Unicorn Tarot. Now this is a deck, here's the back. This is a deck that it's not my thing. It's really not. It's cute and it's, fun and funky, but the purpose of this deck is my daughter is going to be 16 here in a couple months, and we are throwing her a magical unicorn sweet 16 party, because that's just what we're doing. So I purchased this deck specifically so that we could do tarot readings at her party, because she, of course, reads tarot and likes to read tarot for her friends and stuff. So we purchased the unicorn deck specifically to use at her party. So this is her sort of early Sweet 16, present deck. It's just really, it's kind of part of the party planning and the decor. It's a cute deck. I don't know if we'll ever use it past her birthday party, but it's really not my thing, not really my art style. Although we have this weird unicorn thing, and we find unicorns everywhere we go, and I call her my special little unicorn, and that's kind of where it started as a joke and has just gone from there. So this one, very sort of sentimental part of my collection because it's set aside for her Sweet 16 birthday. So that is the Crystal Unicorn Tarot. So up next we have the Game of Thrones Tarot. And this is a deck, here's the backs, not my favorite backs, honestly. This is a deck that I bought just strictly for collectible purposes. I have never read with this deck. I do hear it reads wonderful. Not to say that I won't ever read with it, I just haven't. I purchased this deck simply for a collectible to have as part of my collection because it is Game of Thrones and my husband and I love to watch that show together. So that is why it's here. It's more of a sentimental collectible thing than an actual working deck for me. As you can see, it's all still in order, but I enjoy having it, and I like having some decks that do have that sentimental or, collectible attachment to them. Not every deck needs to be read with, in my opinion. Sometimes they can just be here, because they have meaning to you and because they remind you of something. And they pull at that memory for you. And I love that about that. So this is a deck that I keep strictly for, collectible, sentimental reasons. Makes me think of, the times that my husband and I spend, together watching the show and talking about it and stuff. So that is the Game of Thrones Tarot. So the last two decks are just my two kind of study decks, and I put them in here because I really kind of forgot about them, to be perfectly honest, and I really didn't know where else to put them at this point. So this is the Waite-Smith Centennial. Here's the backs. I mean, everybody's seen it. I'm not going to go through a huge thing. This deck, I do not read with this deck or use this deck for readings. This deck is strictly for study. And I think it makes a gorgeous study deck. I love the color palette. I love the kind of aged, vintage look of it. And it's a great deck for studying, when you want to do comparisons with other decks, just to kind of see how they compare and contrast with the Waite-Smith Tarot. So just a study deck. But I think everybody needs study decks in their collection. So that is the Smith-Waite Centennial Tarot. And finally, the last deck is my other study deck, which is my Thoth Tarot. Here's the backs. Again, a deck everybody has seen. This is a deck that I do use strictly for study when I'm doing comparisons, or I want to see how a deck or a card compares to the Thoth and the Waite-Smith. That's pretty much the purpose of this deck. I do not read Thoth. At some point, I would very much like to dive deeper into the Thoth system, but I have so many other decks right now that I'm more interested in getting into. So this is on the back burner, but I do pull it out on occasion for study, or if I'm comparing, cards to different systems or different decks, different systems. So it's a great deck for that. I mean, it is foundational, so I think it's important to have in your collection. And someday I will actually get to the point of actually studying and using this deck, possibly. So that is the Thoth Tarot. Thank you so much for checking out my collection of sentimental and collectible decks. I would love to hear about the truly meaningful decks in your collection or your thoughts on the ones I have shown here, so feel free to leave a comment below. And if you'd like to check out the rest of my deck collection, be sure to subscribe to my channel and click that little bell for notifications. Thank you again for watching, and I hope you will join me again soon for more creative tarot for an inspired life.